I did a comparison between Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump in terms of their contacts who had migrant backgrounds. Now, Reagan was a very different man than Donald Trump. They're not the same guys, but there are parallels, right? There's different networks that wanted to control a president like Reagan, or wanted to influence a president like Donald Trump. And so, you are old enough, Jeff, to actually remember Reagan, correct?
Yes, I'm old enough to remember Jack Kennedy as president.
Yeah, so
I was 5 years old. I was 5 years old when he was assassinated, and I remember I was mesmerized watching his funeral on TV.
Yeah, but you're like 20. You're like what, 20 years older than I am, and I was born in 1984, so I was a little kid, and I was entering school in 1990 when the Soviet Union was officially done, right?
I was in 1984. I was 26 years old. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was in the Marine Corps Reserve when the revolution happened in Iran, and I thought we were all going to be called up to go fight over there because they took our hostages.
Yeah, so a lot of people,
kind of surprised that I wasn't.
A lot of people who are younger than you are, they never experienced Reagan or that area of the Cold War. They never really saw it, experienced it, lived it as an adult. So because they were conscious later, let's say 1990 or the 90s, they never bothered to actually learn about the Reagan era and to learn about the Soviet Union because they thought it's over. Why should I learn anything about it? Why should I get into the moles, the super moles, the spies,
and the Cold War and the spies and everything was going on years before I was born. That started after World War II, and I was born 13 years after World War II ended, and it had been going on for more than a decade.
Yeah,
when I was born, so it was. I remember being shocked as a little boy, seeing a picture of the Soviet Union and seeing how much bigger it was than the United States. Being kind of afraid. Does that mean they're more powerful than we are?
Yeah, and so the thing is, when we talk about Soviet subversion and Soviet espionage, there's a whole. It has a bigger dimension than what people really understand, especially because of Europe, because the Soviet Union officially, in terms of its territory, the Soviet Union didn't extend to Western Europe, right? But they had espionage all over, espionage deeply embedded in Western Europe. And then, of course, when the Soviet Union was forming, a lot of people were fleeing west. They were getting out of Poland, or they were getting out of the Baltics, and they were, getting into West Germany and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of espionage came with that. And so then you get all these different people, German background, went to the United States, could be a spy. Polish background or Polish Jewish background, went to the United States, could be a total spy. Baltics, went to the United States, could be a spy, could be sleeper agents, especially when these characters are drawn to power. They magically have success in the US, and then they try to influence all kinds of things and interconnect with other very problematic networks. Sometimes people that sound pretty much like Jeffrey Epstein's seemed like, right? This weirdo, some very weird and dark intersections. So on its face, or just on a superficial level, there are similarities between Reagan and Trump. So Reagan had worked in the entertainment industry, so did Trump. Reagan was close to the Democrats for a long time before making a turn to the right. Same with Trump, kinda. Both had many strange, very close contacts to people with an Eastern European and Russian background. But both followed a strong foreign policy as presidents. That's true as well. So almost all observers, including the conspiracy cranks, didn't truly know what to make of these two guys. So their environments were heavily influenced by people whose history is partially buried in the chaos of Europe, the late Russian Tsarist Empire, and the USSR. So Eurasian territory, from Lisbon, Portugal to Wladiwostok, has always been a den of spies, and untangling this mess is the only way to have freedom and independence in places like the US. So obviously Americans really don't like having America explained to them by foreigners. It's regarded as highly insulting, of course. Now, I'm a German with family in North Carolina and the New Jersey area. My cousin worked for the fire department of New York during 9/11. And instead of glorifying messy, secretive European countries and patronizing US citizens, I would rather offer assistance in counterintelligence. Now, President Donald Trump's own grandfather was born in Bavaria, Germany. Now, Donald is in trouble for his past socializing with Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein, whose parents were Jews from Poland and Lithuania. Now, the emphasis is on Polish and Lithuanian. The Jewish factor is a side note. Jews and non-Jews in Europe and Russia were under control by different empires, which has significant...
what part of Poland was Jeffrey Epstein? So Lithuania had been part of the Soviet Union starting in 1940. When did they immigrate? When did his parents immigrate?
Well, one of these days I'll do a detailed breakdown of his what we can tell about his parents.
He was born in... he was just a couple of years older than me. I think he was born in, 1955, 56?
Yeah. And how do you background check? How do you background check his parents? I mean, how does the United States at the time back then, now you have different capabilities, but back then, how do you background check the parents of Jeffrey Epstein? Oh, we're from Poland. Oh, we're from Lithuania. What area exactly? And what time frame? Who was in control of Poland at the time? And who was in control of Lithuania at the time? And also, the Soviets kind of inherited, certain operations from the Tsarist Empire. Because why would you cancel everything that was going on? When you capture a state, when you capture an apparatus, why stop certain operations in foreign countries? You can just continue them. So it's difficult. How do you background check Jeffrey Epstein's parents? So Jews and non-Jews in Europe and Russia were under control by different empires, which had significant espionage capabilities. So it's very complicated to figure out.
I guess it was his grandparents that immigrated to the United States, not his parents.
Let me just check this real quick.
Yeah, it wasn't his parents. So they came they would have come, if it was his grandparents, then they would have come before World War I would guess. And they were probably part of the persecuted, that would have been the Russian Empire. Poland was under the Russian Empire, Lithuanian was. And this is in the Western Pale of Settlement, you had a lot of Jews and you had the Black Hundreds and you had pogroms against the Jews. This is why a lot of East European Jews immigrated to the United States, because they were being persecuted.
Yeah, it says Lithuanian Jewish
in Russia.
And Polish Jewish ancestry had married in 1952, okay? But again, how do you background check the Epstein family? How do you do that? Do you have access to Lithuanian records and Polish records? I think not. And Jeffrey, as we know, became very influential and was attached to many, many different people. So many additional powerful individuals in the Trump administrations and in his business and private circles have European roots like this. So it's not a long drive for me if I wanted to visit Poland or Lithuania in the Baltics. It's actually pretty close.
Well, Trump himself has connections. His business has connections to people that worked for or are related to Mogilev, the brainy Don from Minsk. There's these Russian mafia connections to the Trump, where they are buying and selling real estate. This is where money laundering takes place from mafias, is through real estate transactions. And it isn't just Trump's company. This has been common in a lot of large real estate companies.
Yeah. So
they get involved in this.
How do you background check anybody? So it's like due to some arrests over the last years in TV shows, more Americans have become familiar with the phenomenon of the sleeper agents. So this is when a government recruits and trains individuals in spycraft, gives them false identities, and has them migrate from place to place until they reach the target country. So each step in the migration chain has a certain time span to make the lives of the sleepers seem believable. Fake marriages are arranged, and these couples have real children who will eventually be recruited by their own parents. Now, record keeping in Europe was often sketchy in the past. Falsifying papers and stealing the identities of people who prematurely died was easy. And everyone wanted to get a piece of America. So this is very important to understand. So these were different forces different forces in Russia, in various stages of Russia. Russian circles, they wanted to have a piece of America. They wanted to infiltrate America. Other places in Europe, European powerful groups, they also wanted a piece of America. They wanted to infiltrate the United States. And let's not forget some of these Germanic or post-Roman Germanic aristocrats, specific aristocrats. They wanted to get America back because they wouldn't let this go, with the independence and the formation of the United States of America. Because, some people may actually remember some of these mercenaries that fought in the Revolutionary War. They were from Hessen, right? They were the ones
Washington, when he crossed the Delaware and attacked him right around Christmas time, he surrendered a bunch of Hessians.
Yeah, because it was a numbers game, and so if you could get another 10,000 troops on short notice, that could actually change the course of the war. And so the British Empire was busy, all over the world with the French and all these competitors, and so they could recruit 10,000 people. 15,000 people. They could recruit such numbers on short notice from places like Hessen in Germany. Now, the aristocratic house of Hessen is extremely powerful, even though almost nobody today knows about them, knows anything about history, and they don't know how they tied into the British Empire or Denmark or even the czars in the last, let's say, the last couple of czars were in Russia. The emperors of Russia.
Queen Victoria's children married.
They were very much tied.
Of Germany, Russia, and Denmark.
Very much tied into this House of Hessen. So you have also these German or Germanic sort of these Germanic power groups that also wanted America back. They wouldn't let this go. They wanted to infiltrate the United States and have influence over the United States, at least. So to, let's say, change policy and say, well, the U.S. should really trade more with Britain, or, America should do this about the French, America should do that about the French. So this is kind of like today's debate when people say, why is America going to war with Iran? Is somebody influencing America to do this? Is it the Jewish conspiracy? Is it blah, blah, blah? Was it Jeffrey Epstein? Was it whatever? So same discussion we need to have about the past, but a professional discussion. All groups wanted to infiltrate the U.S., and they sent their people to America. Now, so when you have a career like Reagan's, a big career usually starts with a significant university. And as we know, universities are a place where a lot of espionage really happens and a lot of influence is exerted. Because if you join certain universities and certain fraternities, you're supposed to be a member for life. You become a member of this secretive or selective organization. A member for life. And when you leave college, you get job opportunities provided by other members of this group or a network of these fraternities. And so what about foreign influence on these structures? What about European influence? European influence on or a European manipulation of American universities. Now, Ronald Reagan earned a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Sociology from Eureka College in 1932. Eureka's alumni list includes dozens of college and university presidents, several governors and members of Congress, and most famously Reagan himself, future 40th president of the United States. While at Eureka, Reagan joined the fraternity Tau Kappa Epsilon, a detail that is easy to overlook. The member badge looked like Nazi SS insignia or the iconography of the Yale Secret Society Skull and Bones. Now I have the official picture here. This creepy badge, with the skull and crossbones, that's the membership badge of Tau Kappa Epsilon. And they even had a coat of arms comparable to European aristocracy. There's also another skull over there. That's very European, this kind of stuff, especially when you just copy it like this. And so the original name of this fraternity, was Knights of Classic Lore. Since when do we have actual knights in America? I thought they were done with this crap. They were done with this.
Oh, we have lots of knights. The Ku Klux Klan were knights.
Yeah, the Grand Knights of the yeah. So it's like it's a plaything for some people, to use these names, but you gotta.
These fraternities are formed by kids, by college kids, who get a little smattering of learning, and they start to grab these symbols and make these things for themselves, right? That's who makes fraternities.
Well, if it has a childish element to it, but if presidents come out of it, if senators and governors come out of it, and there's you need to look at what you're getting. That's what I'm saying, because when you're young and when you're powerful, you have a powerful future ahead of you, you become a bit reckless. And this is something that professional organizations have used for a long time, and the Europeans were experts at that. We've had so many serious organizations that looked exactly like this.
Compromise kids when they're young? Is that the idea?
Well, the Bavarian Illuminati was was an organization like this. It was based on at the University of Ingolstadt. I actually went to the sister college in Eichstätt, but they were always hiding themselves behind something. They had a facade. It was something either benign facade or a slight enlightenment facade, but they were doing something completely different underneath.
You had what was it? You had Goethe's. Goethe was in the Illuminati. You also had the father of the most famous Austrian statesman.
What, the Metternich guy or the other ones?
Metternich's father was in the Illuminati.
Well, and also,
I don't think he was. And of course, that family, they were very pro-English. They were Anglophiles. The Metternich.
And some of them, some of these organizations, they captured they got new members because they presented themselves as rebellious. They would have wild parties, and really wild parties, and sometimes like the Hellfire Club in Europe, like the Hellfire Club, they would be more serious in their partying. So this is when it gets a bit sketchy in terms of having fun, and it was the allure of power and being reckless when you're young. This fraternity that Reagan went to, they had a slew of scandals related to hazing and extreme drinking. Some people died
Well,
from.
he went there. He went to school there. What, in the late 1920s or in the early
He
30s?
he got his degree in 1932.
So he would have gone there from 1928 to 32. It's usually a 4-year deal in American
Yeah, and let's
colleges.
not forget the Germans. They also had a lot of these. The Germans had a lot of these
Or
extreme right wing.
Yeah, Skull and Bones at Yale originated in Germany.
Yeah,
Skull and
I mean
Bones actually
the Nazi
originated in
movement,
Germany.
the whole Nazi movement was built on these earlier organizations, which were into occult practices, or they had all kinds of organizations tied to universities as well, and they would have lodges and stuff.
But in a way, it's a social club. In a way, you could say these fraternities are really social clubs, and they're members of each class graduate.
But
And look,
spies like to hide in all kinds of organizations. I mean, it's not just flashy organizations. It's not just like trying to embed espionage in the Masons or Skull and Bones. You can embed espionage into anything. I mean, usually
but how many American universities have this Phi Delta Theta? I mean, how big is it? Is it how many campuses is it at?
Oh, it's like like they have. I think they have like. I mean, there's different subtypes of these or different chapters of these.
So when people say that there's all these governors and stuff and politicians who come out of this, if you've got half the colleges in America have this as one of their fraternities, you're going to get a lot of politicians.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they have usually they have. When they count living members, I mean, it's not like everybody becomes president who's in one of these groups, but when over the years, when people go through these, become members, and they go on afterwards, they have a certain significant number of living members that try to connect to each other. But as always, we need to be watchful when it comes to espionage, especially espionage that comes from Europe. And this would have been a prime target. I mean, any student organization like this would have been a prime target for European spying, Eastern European spying, and Russian spying. I mean, I talked about in a previous episode about the exiled, the exiled Romanovs and all kinds of exiled Russian aristocrats who would go to Europe, who would go to the US, and they would connect with military people. High-ranking U.S. military officers and politicians, and they would influence these Americans and push the fake protocols of Zion on them. They would just try to influence them so hard, and move them towards a more fascist view. There's all kinds of influence, all kinds of influence operations going on.
I mean, to kind of maybe quell the idea that this Phi Delta Theta is a major conspiratorial group. It is a major international fraternity with over 195 active chapters and emerging chapters across the United States and Canada. And its total initiated members today are over 312,000 people.
Exactly.
And it was founded in 1848. The year of the Communist Manifesto, the year of the revolutions, the year of revolutions sweeping Europe.
Yeah. And if you target an organization like this, you would have a pre-selection of people who are going to have interesting jobs and are going to have access to interesting
with thousands
information.
Of politicians, with thousands of politicians,
because these people will go on. These people in those fraternities, they will go on to have interesting jobs, have access to sensitive information. They will have access to interesting people. So, of course, this is like a hunting ground, and we've seen this in Europe all over the place. I mean, sometimes we actually get a police crackdown, like on the Bavarian Illuminati, and we get some internal documents. But usually, that is not the case. So obviously, it's a process.
It's at 305 colleges. This particular fraternities at 305 colleges. So you would not be surprised. I mean, nobody here can even Nobody listening to me right now can name 305 colleges in Canada and the United States.
Yeah,
that's a lot of names.
So the mythological ideal or patron of Tau Kappa Epsilon is Apollo, an important and complex Olympian deity in Greek and Roman mythology. Tau Kappa Epsilon is also affiliated with the German fraternity system known as the Corps of the Weinheimer Senioren Convent. That is the second oldest German student society association, founded in Frankfurt, Hessen. Again, Hessen, center of one of the most powerful aristocratic dynasties in history, with members ruling the British Empire as far as Russia. So, of course, the rulers of Hessen, they wanted America back, obviously. So there's one espionage risk here out of many. The House of Hessen had recruited the Rothschild family for a banking front organization, so to say. And every conspiracy buff and almost all Muslims today believe the Rothschilds took over the world. Almost nobody today knows about the House of Hessen, which had recruited the Rothschilds. And so besides Reagan, other widely recognized political figures from this fraternity include former West Virginia Senator Robert Byrd, longest-serving member in the history of the United States Congress back then, former Arkansas governor and Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, CEOs like Howard Schultz of Starbucks, Mark Benioff of Salesforce, and Steve Forbes of Forbes magazine. And so then after graduation, when he had this membership, you know, this was his new status. He had a network now. After graduation, Reagan built a career as a sports broadcaster, developing the voice, the timing, the performance that would later become part of his political identity. So the ability to sound spontaneous while working from a mental script, improvisation inside a prepared structure. So then he got into Hollywood. A screen test led to a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers, and he arrived in Hollywood in 1937. So the studio era was a tightly controlled ecosystem. A key figure in the transformation of Hollywood power, and also a key figure in the career of Reagan, in the career of Ronald Reagan, was Lew Wasserman. Lew Wasserman, widely described as one of the most influential deal-makers in the industry, the last of the legendary movie moguls, arguably the most powerful Hollywood figure in the decades after World War II. Wasserman renegotiated Reagan's contract in ways that opened additional opportunities. And Wasserman was also a major political fundraiser and an influential player in Democratic Party circles, not Republican, Democratic Party circles, illustrating how entertainment, money, and politics often share overlapping networks. Wasserman was born to a Jewish family in Cleveland, Ohio, the son of Isaac Wasserman and Minnie Chernick, both immigrants from Russia. Wasserman's close friend was Jack Valenti, son of Italian immigrants, again, Europe, represents another bridge between media and state power. Valenti served as a special assistant to President Lyndon B. Johnson, later became the longtime head of the Motion Picture Association of America. His background, combat service as a bomber pilot in World War II, decorated for valor and endurance, gave him credibility in both patriotic and political circles. And so the Warner Brothers, these were actual brothers. This was not just a name. So these brothers, they needed money to expand their operations. So we're talking about the Polish Jews. These were Polish Jews, Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack Warner. So those were the Warner Brothers in Hollywood, and they got their money. They got a lot of money from Goldman Sachs, the well-known bank. In 1924, Goldman Sachs arranged a major loan for the studio, a reminder that American entertainment power quickly became inseparable from American financial power. And Marcus Goldman, the firm's founder, was a German Jewish immigrant, a German Jewish immigrant who arrived in the United States in the mid-19th century. So he came from Germany. So individuals, and all these people, they all come from Europe. They all have this European background or Eastern European background or Russian background. Individuals in Europe, Jewish or not, had no meaningful power whatsoever. At best, they could get recruited by the aristocracies and perform tasks as ordered. So when you hear or read Jew from Poland or Jew from Germany or Jew from Lithuania, you don't automatically know whom you're dealing with, what network this person was potentially working for, or what level of insight this person actually possessed while performing tasks and missions for a handler. Reagan enlisted in the United States Army Reserve. He produced hundreds of training films, so that was his career. And then Reagan became president of the Screen Actors Guild. Now, this is Hollywood royalty, basically. If you have that position, you have power in Hollywood. And this was also the era of the subversives in Hollywood.
Yeah.
These were
the Screen
communists.
Actors Guild was basically a union for actors.
Yeah,
and basically what it was.
And so they had the massive scandal of powerful people in Hollywood, very powerful people in Hollywood, having connections to the Communist Party, the Communist Party of the United States. And so there was counteractions against that. There were investigations, and a famous flashpoint was called the Hollywood 10. 10 left-leaning screenwriters and directors cited for contempt of Congress after refusing to answer questions before the House Un-American Activities Committee. So those 10 suspicious people were Alva Bessie, Herbert Bieberman, Lester Cole, Edward Dmytryk, Ring Lardner Jr., John Howard Lawson, Albert Maltz, Samuel Ornitz, Adrian Scott, and Dalton Trumbo. Some of these figures had Communist Party associations. Many were children of immigrants or came from immigrant communities, and several were Jewish. So all of this made background checks for possible communist cell activities really difficult. So Reagan played his role. He was supposed to, he was supposed to do his part in figuring out who was a communist. But then, this influence kept growing on Ronald Reagan. All these foreigners, all these Europeans that were in his life and in his career. Reagan's second wife, Nancy Reagan, had her own web of cultural connections. A striking detail sometimes mentioned in biographies is that the Russian-born actress Alla Nazimova was Nancy's godmother. Nazimova was renowned for her work in Ibsen. You mentioned that guy before, the Norwegian writer. For her work in Ibsen, Chekhov, and Turgenev. Became one of the highest paid actresses in the US, a star, and later gained renewed attention for avant-garde artistic influence and early queer cultural history. She created the Garden of Allah Hotel, a celebrity party refuge. So,
how curious.
Yeah, it sounds like the dark days of Hollywood, and maybe even it sounds a bit like what Epstein was doing. They were creating these closed off places, guarded communities where the selected few could party, and she was like the early star. This Alla Nazimova. She was like the early star of, for the gays and the queers and the lesbians. I think she was a lesbian or bisexual. And, she was Russian-born. I think she was even a star in Russia before she came to the U.S. And she got very, very, very close to Nancy Reagan, who was then who became the wife of the President of the United States. And so Reagan began his political life as a Democrat, admiring Franklin D. Roosevelt as a true hero. The Roosevelt family traces its roots to Claes Martensen van Rosenfeld, a Dutch immigrant who arrived in New Amsterdam in the mid-17th century, so that migrant background was a long time ago. But let's not forget, Holland was not a insignificant place in the past. The aristocratic house Orange-Nassau controlled Holland, invaded England, and took the crown. Reagan also worked with the AFL-CIO to oppose right-to-work laws aligning with mid-century labor liberalism. And over time, he shifted to the right, supporting the presidential campaigns of Dwight D. Eisenhower and Richard Nixon. So was Reagan? I mean, it would have been brilliant if Reagan had actually been involved in some counterintelligence, and he was effectively spying against communists in Hollywood, in other places, the industry, Hollywood people trying to get into politics or influencing politics. So we can read this many different ways, and this is what makes it so interesting. And this is why people need to be cautious when you study a man like Ronald Reagan and his associations, because it is what it is. Different groups from all over the world, they all wanted to get into America. They all wanted to get into the universities, and they all wanted to shape and control the future, moguls and presidents and judges and get into their private life, right? But the U.S. wasn't dumb either. The U.S. would try to build its own system of whom to trust, and it's conceivable that the system failed against the Soviet Union, and who knows how many sleeper agents are out there, and then of course when we look at Donald Trump, we see the same kind of stuff. I mean, Donald Trump's first wife, Donald Trump's second wife, how communist Soviet intelligence was after his, I think it was his first wife. We got some new released files, I think, from former, I think it was STB intelligence service, Czechoslovakian service, was it? I kind of have a little trouble remembering this, but this was like the same thing. So Donald could have married American women. He married somebody from the Eastern Bloc, and Soviet intelligence is trying to work the family of Donald's wife. Eastern European wife, comes with a certain type of communist baggage, right? And of course, all these business dealings and all these connections, and Roy Cohn, the influential figure in Donald's life, Jewish background, but this usually means European background. We saw other billionaires or Jewish billionaires giving money to Donald's campaign. We saw the Mercer family, or the Mercers, Shillmans, and Rosenwalds a couple of years ago, buying their way into the new right wing. This was like the Mercer family.
Donald Trump's son-in-law is Jewish, famously, and has been criticized for having him so much involved in negotiations and dealings in his administrations, particularly his first administration. So he has basically he's got Jewish people in his family. Trump does.
Yeah, and so this is like something that reminded me so much. Of Reagan. Now, at a time, very powerful in this whole Trump phenomenon, or this new right-wing, alt-right-wing, whatever you want to call it, phenomenon, there was a lot of money coming in from the Mercer family. This was the hedge fund manager, Robert Mercer. So they put in money for think tanks and very influential with Donald Trump's campaign in 2016. So we have Robert Mercer, Rebecca Mercer, the daughter, and they put over $100 million in right-wing think tanks. They have the Mercer Family Foundation. And so this is gaining... I mean, this is not new information to the people that were on the Trump hype. I mean, this complete Trump hype. He's going to save us from everything. He's going to save us from the left. He's going to arrest the left deep state. He's going to save the world together with Putin and blah, 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 blah. So people, years ago, they would forgive Donald for his connections, his many connections to people with a European background. Now they're not so forgiving anymore because the Russians now want to damage Donald Trump and his credibility. And so this is like another one of those families. And there was this casino guy. What was his name? This casino billionaire who put in a lot of money.
There's a number of those
into the Trump campaign. Yeah. So there's like people need to understand. Okay, there's so many influential individuals.
Weren't a lot of the casinos in China?
Yeah. So what?
His name was Stephen. I can't remember the last name now.
Steven. Yeah. So we'd have to look at these individuals and their backstory and their family backstory. How long has this particular family, the Mercers or others, how long have they been at this game? How long have they been influential in the US? How did they become successful? And it's like, it's the same with people that are completely not Jewish, like Peter Thiel. People got scared in recent days or the last week or so about the new generation of software like Palantir, that these corporations from Peter Thiel and others, for the police force, for the military, for the intelligence services, this whole AI thing. So who did a proper background of Peter Thiel, who was, I think, born in Germany? Was this a German guy? And Elon Musk's grandfather, who was part of a Canadian organization, which was quite large at the time, and they were technocrats. They got into trouble with the Canadian government at some point. That's why Elon's grandfather went to South Africa and wrote conspiracy books, traditional conspiracy books, and so these technocrats in Canada, they wanted to change the system. They wanted a technocratic form of government, which sounded an awful lot like socialism. So it's like these bureaucrats, scientist bureaucrats, they control everything. And every person that gets born gets labeled and gets assigned resources, and your whole life is planned out for you. And resources are not allocated according to demand and supply and prices and negotiation, but it's decisions of these scientists. Even though scientists for hundreds of years have oftentimes been occultists. I mean, go ask the British with the Freemasonry and the sister organization, the Royal Society for Science. Especially, when they started out with the Royal Society and they were all kind of Rosicrucians, were heavily into the occult. So it's like both of these presidents, both of these men, they had these foreign influences on them. Many of them. I mean, we talked about Donald's father and how important it was for Donald's father to have a connection to the Wagner family. Wagner Jr., who was the mayor of New York City for 3 terms. And the older Wagner was also very powerful and also tied to politics. This was a German family. This was the Wagner family, right? And so it's like we need to understand that America America needs a new dimension of counterintelligence. We need to figure out who these families are, all these families, who influenced whom, and who's pulling the strings. Because now, with the Iran war, people don't understand anything anymore. They were told Trump was going to change everything, even though he was one guy. And he didn't have this magical rebellious group behind him, which was claimed by Alex Jones and others. He was just a guy, and he was taught.
Yeah, they claimed it was sort of a secret. They implied often it was military guys, some clique within the military that wanted to save America, or within the intelligence community and so on. But this is, to counter the conspiracy, to be against the Rothschilds, etc. Yeah, this nonsense, this counter conspiracy, this is just, when you consider who Alex Jones has been financed by and who he's hired on his staff, Russian nationals and so on, and you see the rhetoric of him and, of course, these other people on the alt-right, Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas McGregor, and of course the famous guy with the funny laugh.